The writing was on the wall. With France's influence waning in Africa, it was time to push reset. This Monday, Emmanuel Macron laid out a revamped strategy for the continent. He has insisted Africa is a priority of his second term as president, and indeed, this week he'll head there for a second time since being re-elected last year, embarking on a four-nation trip to Gabon, Angola, the Republic of Congo, and finally the Democratic Republic of Congo. France, long been a major broker on the continent, but with political instability, insecurity, and France-Afrique, a cozy web of ties with its ex-colonies, some countries feel France has overstayed its welcome. And today is the 21st century. There is increased diplomatic competition. China, Russia, Turkey, and others are offering alternatives. Tonight on the France 24 debate, we ask, what is France's role in Africa? Joining us on this set is Emmanuel Macron, a consultant in geopolitics and international development. Hello to you, Emmanuel. Also joining us, Lova Vinel, an associate researcher at the Foundation for Strategic Research and a guest at the Élysée Palace earlier. You rushed over here to join us. Thank you for coming. I'm imagining you'll have a lot to say. Also joining us by Skype from London is Paul Melly, a consulting fellow of the Africa program at Chatham House. Hello to you, Paul. Thanks for our guest joining us here on the debate. First, let's begin with a clip from Emmanuel Macron's speech earlier.
Many would like to push us into a competition that I believe belongs in the past. This would be falling into a trap set by those who want us to try and show our might. Look, some are coming with their armies and mercenaries. Go and compete with them. I don't believe in this. These are ways of the past, where we show our military might and share exclusive ties with certain leaders and believe that economic markets are just ours because we were there first. We'd fight to play center stage. I think those times are over.
Lova Vinel, Emmanuel Macron saying the bases will not be closed, they will be transformed. The reduction, how many, we still don't know, some 3,000 troops on African soil at the moment. But still, it marks a major shift, doesn't it?
I think this speech was something like a repetition, meaning we have it 6 years ago.
Déjà vu.
Yes, and we have it, this speech. This speech was a debate. I was there too in Montpellier. I was with these young people who debates with the president. Today I was there, but to be honest, a relationship for me is between minimum 2%. So we African, we request all the time things from France, and I think it's obviously we have this complicated history. About slavery, colonization, France-Afrique. But where are the African presidents until 6 years? We're waiting from their own, debates, their own requests, their own intention from France. Until now, it's a silence. But for me, the president, I can't say that he fall into a trap, but he want to change the story. To change the story, you have to have somebody in front of you. Until now, no president in Africa give an answer, concrete answer. So we are always expect from France things. We are talking about the military bases. We are talking about the France CFA. We are talking about masterpiece restitution. It's good things. But I can't say people because we're talking about president to president. Now is the time for African president to be the leaders and say, okay, President Macron, 6 years ago of work, now it's our time.
Yeah, but
you understand what I mean?
In the face of that silence at that speech in Ouagadougou 6 years ago, Emmanuel Macron said, I'm not going to tell Africans what to do.
In Ouagadougou, Emmanuel Macron made a speech to,
800 students.
Yeah. Roch Kaboré was there. Remember at this moment, he was out to find a solution about the electricity. I don't still have the end of the story. But it's, for me, to change the minds, it's a question not only of France's position, African people have to change their position. And until now there is a big silence from Africa. So my question is, where are our African leaders?
Emmanuel, you got Nigeria in the midst of counting ballots. We don't know who your next president will be, but it will be someone new. Do you feel like this was also a case of deja vu and maybe more an extension of what Macron has already promised, but maybe not delivering?
Well, we hope to get the result of the Nigerian elections today, if not early tomorrow morning. But that's a $1 million question: who is going to take over from President Buhari? Well, I think Emmanuel Macron, well, globally, I think his speech was good. He challenged the African heads of states. You've been leaving France to be in the front line to try to do things for you. And we want to change this paradigm now. And we want, just like Lover was saying, the initiatives to come from you. And then we can see how we can follow. And that has not actually been happening. I think the heads of states, African heads of states, have been used to sitting in their comfort zones and allowing France to give them whatever protection they need, especially when they are doing things that are not, let me say, democratically correct. Sometimes like changing the constitution, things like that to elongate.
Allowing for more term limits?
Yes, and they wouldn't want France to come inside there. So just leave us to do what we want to do. And that has been going on in several countries. It's happened in Guinea-Conakry, happened in some other countries, and led to serious issues. So France seems to be learning now from this past situation, where I have a problem. Macron is saying we don't want to go into competition with other powers because competitions are things of the past. For me, it is now the competition is beginning. It is now just beginning. And as you recalled, or Macron himself recalled, China is now on board, India is on board, Russia is on board. And these are the things, this is reality now. And the competition is going to be stronger and stronger. The question was asked to Macron on this, and he said, well, when I was talking about competition, I am not looking at the military angle. I was just looking at the economic angle, that France should feel at ease to have other economic actors coming to compete with France on the continent. But these two things go hand in hand, military and economic.
For me, it's very important because you just appointed the real issue. France is the old, colonial country. Meaning that what is the symbol of this colony? It's our base, military base. So the question was from a Gabonese journalist. We just ask, okay, you want to change, but what does it mean in real? We are talking about, competition, but in the beginning you talked about competition that you don't want to. And now you want competition, as you say, about economic. But it's two different things, because it was talking about Wagner. It was exactly what we should do. And he say, as my old country's history, I don't want to be in competition in, military sequences. My question is now, obviously we have China, Turkey, United States in your country. Just remember, we were talking about France-Afrique, but for me as French, when I saw these videos, with American leaders saying to Nigerian people, go to the polls and say, okay, just imagine, just guess how it will be considered if French people will do that in Mali or Burkina Faso. It will be the war in the street. And you understand what I mean? So
exactly.
The French, the anti-French sentiment is something, in the air on this speech. But what is important that the president wanted to make a clear separation on the competition of army. He said, for me, it's over. So now I request us reconsidering the way of we have to be there in the security, because Africa have the huge security issues. And we can't, say, put it in one and say, no, it's not a problem. The second thing is say, but we are in competition. And you just say, remember, when French president, I came to Africa, I have African leaders there with the the huge African company here. When African president come in France, they have the number 10, as he said. It's not a respect. And I think it's something that is very important to say. It's reconsidering African people as a place of competition, as it is, in the world. Not because Africans don't need good things, good goods. You understand what I mean? So what is very important to say? We are talking about how France will demonstrate the ends of arrogance, to be more, to give more humility. Is that in this way? Stop the military presence because it's too much. People are just boring. And to be honest, it's not as, the Legion say, as there is too much bases, military bases. We have 3 bases in Africa, not in each country. It's very important to say it. And I think that to say this military camp is too complicated. We have to stop it. Now we are talking about business and we're in competition.
Yeah, Emmanuel Macron often criticized as being arrogant or patronizing here in France as well. Paul Melly, I'd like to get your take. It's a tricky juggling act, isn't it, for the French president? Sometimes if he does too much, it could be accused of intervening. If he doesn't do enough, then he's not delivering on his promises.
Yeah, it's always going to be an incredibly difficult juggling act because France is the old former colonial power, even though most people in Africa, of course, were born long after the end of the colonial era and have no memory of it. That sensitivity is always going to be there. There's a little anecdote almost which sums it up. People often complain that Macron, or even his predecessors as French president, don't raise cases of human rights abuse or questions of authoritarian rule, especially towards allied countries. But then a few years ago at the agricultural trade fair in Paris, a Cameroonian opposition supporter stopped Macron as he was touring the stands and said, why don't you chase up President Biya about this or that problem in Cameroon, the Anglophone crisis, and what what the Cameroonian government should be doing? And spoke out and said, yes, I often speak to Biya about that. I call him regularly and say this problem needs resolving. Once he said that, lots of people stood up and complained that he was being arrogant and interfering in Cameroon's internal affairs. So this is always going to be the dilemma that he faces. But I think what we could see with the speech today was it was both a continuation of what he first set out at Ouagadougou, but also an attempt to pursue it in a more subtle, more tactful way. Effectively, he admitted in his words that he had basically learnt lessons from the way things have evolved over the last 5 or 6 years. So the original agenda at Ouagadougou to say, let's move beyond head of state relations, let's broaden it out, let's look at these cultural issues, let's have a much deeper understanding and recognition of Africa in human terms, in social terms. All that was still there, but this time it's couched in a much more diplomatic language. When he made the Ouagadougou speech, it looked like something of a show-off performance, and that joke about the president of Burkina Faso popping out to fix the air conditioning was rightly seen as arrogant, throwaway. He was very careful to avoid those kind of traps today and to try and couch things very much more in the language of respect. And I think what he was saying, for example, about the bases, it's worth remembering that he made another speech just back in November where he said that as France reviewed its military strategy in Africa, it would go and listen to the African governments and see what they wanted. It would ask them what their needs were. So he's trying to sort of set this new tone, but it's difficult.
When we think about France's presence on the continent, the first thing we think about is its military presence, is these troops intervening in a number of countries. And if those troops are reduced, if that military presence is reduced, are we giving the French president too much credit to think, okay, well, now France is opening up to at least using other foreign policy tools?
No, I think he's got on the military side two different things to do at once. One is to try and maintain the support for the strategy of fighting the jihadist groups and stabilizing the Sahel. And let's not forget, there are now a couple of thousand French troops in Niger by agreement with the Niger government. So that's, if you like, a bit of a continuation of the strategy before, but with the French more in a support role rather than front line. But the question of the bases, which are very sort of well known and visible in Libreville, in Dakar, in Abidjan, this is where he's trying to change the role of those places that are not, as it were, in the front line of the struggle against jihadism, but could play a sort of support role. And that's where he has perhaps more flexibility, if you like, to come up with this new model. And they were quite clever in the way they handled the presentation of the policy. For weeks, they've been briefing and putting out media messages, if you like, that the number of French troops would probably be reduced. But this idea of sharing the sovereignty of the bases, in effect, of opening them up so that they become joint bases with the African host countries, and that they could also be bases where other partner allies might come in that the African countries would choose. That's something quite fresh. So he's trying to set a new tone there, but it's still a very difficult diplomatic juggling act.
Indeed. Emmanuel, if France is relying on local troops to do more, what does it mean for security, notably in the Sahel?
Well, it means greater training for the national troops. It means greater equipment for them, which they don't always have.
There's been some resentment about how Ukraine has been getting so much help and so much support.
Yes, it's one of the issues, because he announced, Love was there, I think he talked about 40 million euros that is going to release to the French diplomatic missions to kick off the implementation of this policy. But what is 40 million when you hear about billions and billions every week for Ukraine? And what is Ukraine what is Ukraine giving the Western powers? What has Ukraine been giving the Western powers compared to what the Western powers have been taking from Africa? So this is what the Africans find unfair. And so I think this new deal that Macron wants to put in place is a little bit dicey. I don't see how maybe you're going to have like 1/3 of French troops in a particular military base, remaining, the others being returned to France, and then the base is now completed with African troops or troops of the country concerned. I don't know how that's going to play out. Going to attack jihadists, etc. Will those troops be willing to do so? How will intelligence be used, be produced and shared? I don't know. It's very dicey. We need to wait for the details, the operational details of this new arrangement, which were not much touched on by the speech Macron made.
Yeah, and Lova, one of the things that we're talking about when we see French troops have left Mali, they've left Central African Republic. Some are fearing, Burkina Faso as well. Some are fearing there could be a domino effect in the region.
Your question is very good. Just to answer to you, because you make this comparison, for me, it's always now in Africa, between what we do in Ukraine and what we do in Africa. For me, I don't think it's a good point, because, to be honest, what's happened in Africa, for me, in Ukraine, for me, it's a colonization. You have a country who decide to say, your land, it's mine now. And what you are talking about...
You're talking of Russia.
Yes, I'm talking about Russia, sorry.
Colonizing
Ukraine. So you are talking about diplomatic, issues. Where are our African diplomats in this issue? Just,
Many are abstaining from voting at the
You
General
understand
Assembly.
what I mean? So the problem, I think the real problem of this relationship between France and Africa, and the president opened, his speech about the fact that stop talking about Africa. We are talking about several countries who have their own problem in Africa. And to mix up every day Africa as if it's one country. It's the big and the huge mistake, because each time I say, yes, Africa did it. But no, what's happened in Madagascar, it's not the same what's happened in South Africa, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, even, media as me as a researcher. Sometimes here I say, Africa. No, I think it was very good to listen again to the president, because when he opened this his speech, he said, start about thinking that Africa is something, united with no, different. First part. The second one is about the security in the Sahel. I think it's the real problem, because France, through François Hollande, he engaged French troops. And remember at this moment,
and all that, yes.
Mali was very happy to host the French army. So Malian people now are so disappointed, because the promise of French coming was the promise of end of poverty, end of insecurity, and France is not God. Because the problem of insecurity, of course, it was a problem of a terrorist attack, but a huge problem of governance. How, and you talked about the formation, how we reinforce the capacity of the army. But my question is, normally, since, more than 10 years after Barkhane, where is, what we call the loi de programmation militaire, the public law, finance public from Malian, to say now it's our priority. France, when made its own priority, it's public finance above 30 years. In Malian, we don't have this. I mean that it's more a question how our leader in Africa be in responsibility when France say, I have to stop this. And you have the other one say, but in reality, we don't want to change. And this is why it's very difficult, because in reality, until now, as I said in the beginning, I'm waiting for an African country say, you're right, Mr. President, change it. And this is how we move the reaction.
Yeah, as you're saying, each situation in each country different. That's a segue to look at the visit Emmanuel Macron will be taking. His first stop will be Gabon. Along with other heads of states and experts, he'll be attending the 1-4 summit, the event aiming to increase efforts for the preservation and the sustainable management of the world's major forests. Let's speak to our reporter, Andrew Hillier in Libreville. Andrew, you're on the ground there. Any idea about if there's enthusiasm ahead of his visit and how the French president will be received?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously, a huge amount of anticipation ahead of French President Emmanuel Macron's visit here. He'll be arriving on Wednesday night here in the capital of Gabon, Libreville. He'll be met by the president of Gabon, Ali Bongo, and they'll have a working dinner. Of course, the big theme, the main reason for this visit is, of course, that One Forest Summit that you mentioned there, a huge environmental summit that'll be gathering several heads of states from the Congo river basin. And of course, the aim of that summit to protect biodiversity in the Congo river basin. So that'll be taking place on Wednesday and Thursday. Of course, there have been questions asked about Emmanuel Macron's visit. It is coming on during an election year. Elections are scheduled to be held here in Gabon in about 6 months' time. And of course, it's controversial because the leader of Gabon is a controversial figure. He was re-elected in 2016 and in an election that was very much contested by the opposition. So there is some criticism coming from the opposition. And one of the questions that was asked by a local journalist from Libreville to Emmanuel Macron after he'd finished his speech was whether or not he understood why why his visit would be controversial. He, of course, replied, insisting that it wasn't a visit aimed at meddling in politics, and he insisted again on the importance of this environmental summit to not only Gabon but also to the Congo river basin and also to the planet as a whole. But it is, of course, a question that will inevitably come up again during his visit when he gets here on Wednesday.
All right, Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew Hillier reporting from Libreville. Paul, I want to ask you, when you're looking at Emmanuel Macron's itinerary for this week's trip, why these 4 countries in Central Africa, and why now?
Well, of course, part of the why now is the summit, another bit, of course it's trivial, but it's still true. During his first term, he did not go to the Central African region at all. The focus was really very much on West Africa, on the Sahel, and then also on some trips to Kenya and South Africa that were very much oriented and towards the economy, and Rwanda for the sort of memorial, reconciling France and Rwanda over the events of around the genocide era in the 90s. So the part of it is a sort of geographical catching up. But I think he can't, the Central African countries are ones with which France has had long and important and deep relations. He can't just ignore the region, even though fewer of the countries in this region have really functioning democracies. I mean, Congo-Brazzaville has a theoretical democratic structure, but is basically an authoritarian state. Your colleague in Libreville pointed out the controversies around the 2016 election. So those, but he can't avoid a visit. So he's trying to find reasons that will allow him to, as it were, make that connection with the region, demonstrate France's commitment, but built around other issues. So this environment summit is it's very useful that is going on, because that gives him a hook to go to Gabon, but it's still delicate because this is an election year. Brazzaville, that will be particularly delicate because it's one of the most authoritarian states in Africa, but it's also a country that has had very long-standing relations with France. And we have to be honest, there are big French oil interests. Total is very important there. So that could be, Congo-Brazzaville could be potentially the most contentious visit. Angola, we have a reformist president who's really brought about major changes since he took over. So President Lorenzo. So that's something where he can be seen that he will be endorsing a process of change. And of course, in DRC, President Tshisekedi has been really trying to consolidate, if you like, the stability of governance institutions after the very long Kabila presidency. So again, that can be viewed in a positive light. But I would say Brazzaville is probably the most contentious and difficult visit because French corruption investigators, a number of there are people who've been indicted from the family of the current president of Congo-Brazzaville, Denis Sassou Nguesso. So that will be really delicate.
Yeah, very, very tricky visit there. Emmanuel, how do you think Emmanuel Macron will be received?
Yes, I think I go along with Paul Melly. He's done a good analysis of this itinerary and what we should be expecting. But where I probably will have to add something is about the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is having a heated relations with its neighbor, Rwanda. And this is something that's been very, very explosive in the past weeks and months, and there's no end in sight to it. I think the Congolese are very hot on this, the Congolese politicians, Congolese youths, and they believe not just France, but the Western powers generally, France, United States, Belgium, United Kingdom, etc., Israel, etc. They are behind Paul Kagame in his efforts to try to infiltrate with people that the Congolese consider are of Rwandan origin, infiltrate them. Many of them are already on the other side, on the Congolese side of the border, and they are trying to consolidate because there are very, very many strategic resources there, strategic minerals, coltan and all that, things that are needed by high-tech industries, not only for the West, but for other countries like China, etc. And because of this, it looks like the Western countries that could bring some influence, some pressure to bear on Kagame to stop this intrusions, infiltrations that have made that place very unstable. They are not willing to do it for simply their own economic and industrial interests. So the Congolese are very hot on that, and I would think that they will take Tshisekedi and probably the streets of Kinshasa will take on Macron when he gets there. So that probably, well, I agree with Paul, Brazzaville will be very, very dicey, but probably the surprise is going to come from Democratic Republic of Congo because of this reason of clashes with Rwanda.
Yeah, and part of those tensions are already more complicated because of Emmanuel Macron reaching out to Paul Kagame and trying to open up about the genocide. How does Emmanuel Macron, again, juggle that tricky balance?
We are all agree with this. It's very complicated. And it's like, all the responsibility is under Emmanuel Macron, The story of Belgium in Republic, we never heard about something from this country because it was this historical colonization.
The colonizer, yeah.
It's important just to precise it again.
That's true.
What for me is very important, just before we talked about Ukraine, and I say it's not a good comparison, but for RDC, for me, it's a good comparison for Rwanda, because it's a question of territory. Yeah. You understand what I mean? So, and the president say, there is a question for a Congolese journalist, the first one.
The very first question, yes.
You come, okay, we understand, but what's happened in my countries? And the president, if we precisely see how and what France votes in the United Nations since 1 year, it's always for the side of Republic Democratic of Congo. It's very important to precise. But for me, it's not enough. It's true. France is a permanent member of the Security Council.
Yes.
As a permanent members, he had to do more. Not to say only, I'm agree with your side. It's not enough, and I agree. And I think, to be honest, Tshisekedi will be right to overcrowded, the street, not to protest again. This is what is not good. Because if it feels like you are the enemies, is a human, it's France, you can say, okay, it's not my problem, it's yours. But I think it's just a way to make, like an electroshock, a clash to the mind of France to say, it's now your problem too, because it's a problem of security, of an international law problem. So we can't say, it's a bilateral problem between Rwanda and Congo. And what is for me important, we are talking about, France and France-Afrique, but we have the French-African area, the French-speaking area organization, l'Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, which in the end is Louise Mushikiwabo.
Yes.
Rwandese people, Rwandese ex-former minister, and for, now, everybody say, will she be the next, head again of this organization? And
I think she has been re-elected.
She will be re-elected.
And I'm not too sure if there is no limitation of...
No, there is no limitation. But my question is how Tshisekedi will be his diplomatic job. And, French-African speaking area say, now it's enough. Rwanda has to be out as Russia, from the Olympic, organization. We say we don't want Russian people. I can understand that Africans say we don't want Rwanda anymore until this problem will be
resolved.
Yes.
One other thing to point out about the countries Emmanuel Macron is visiting, Paul Melly. When you look at the list of the countries, it's noteworthy to say that 3 abstained from voting at the UN to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the lone exception being DR Congo. Maybe that's tit for tat, France supporting DR Congo. Paul Melly, do you think Emmanuel Macron will be trying to sway minds about the war in Ukraine when he makes this visit?
I think, yes, but certainly not in a public way, because when, you may recall a year ago, in the very first UN vote, quite a few African countries also abstained. And when Western governments complained about it, African leaders said, look, either this is not our crisis, or else you're being arrogant. It's not for you to tell us how we should vote. But I think in private, he will try to make the case, but I think more through a security argument, through the argument that if the international system in the end, allows Russia to get away with, if you like, conquering part of a neighboring country, seizing the eastern slice of Ukraine, then that is undermining the stability and security of other countries in other parts of the world, because it's breaching a fundamental principle of the international system, the rules-based system. I think it's that kind of argument he will make. Rather, I don't think that he will be trying to sort of pull a moral argument at the Africa, because vis-a-vis the African leaders that he meets, or even in the public, if it comes up in the sort of public fora, debates with students or whatever, because his whole posture is to try and come across as having learnt lessons of being humble and of listening to people. And I think that relates us to another challenge that he faces on this trip, and more broadly for France and other Western countries in their dealings with Africa, that so many African leaders, as Lova was pointing out, they're becoming detached, if you like, from their publics. They're quite often not speaking out. There's deep, deep disillusion particularly among young people in cities across Africa, so often with their political class. And that poses a real challenge if you turn up as a foreign leader, and of course you're meeting other government leaders, you reach agreements with them and understandings with them. That doesn't necessarily mean you've got the buy-in of ordinary people. So it's a really difficult diplomatic challenge.
Yeah, I just want to point out that the three countries that abstained from voting against that UN resolution were not alone. A total of 15 African countries did abstain. Why is the war in Ukraine being so divisive in Africa?
It's a perception in Africa that the relations with the Western powers has been that of double yardstick. You don't treat African issues the same way you treat other countries. And Lova was just bringing out the example of this Ukraine issue. And of course, what is happening between the DRC and Rwanda is very comparable to what happens in Ukraine when Russia crossed over to take over a part of Ukraine. And you see all the mobilization that came from the West against Russia. And the Africans were very quick to understand that actually behind what is going on in Ukraine, it's not really a direct confrontation between Ukraine and Russia. It is a confrontation between Ukraine and the powers that are protecting Ukraine and Russia. So they see it as a kind of this time not Cold War between the Russian camp and the Western camp. It's war by proxy being waged by the West against Russia. So that is the perception they have. And based on that, they say, well, we should be free to be able to choose our partners, just like Ukraine is now being treated with all the favors and all the support, so that Ukraine will be allowed to choose its partners, to be able to go into NATO, to be able to join the EU. And that was one of the things that brought the kind of tension between Ukraine and Russia. But why are Africans not being allowed to choose their partners freely? And if Africans choose Russia, then France, USA, and all those countries, they get very jittery. And so is this double standard that is pushing a lot of African countries to vote.
And does it feel like there's a rush to get, the sort of jockeying to get Africa support? Because in recent weeks, we've seen the foreign minister from Russia, the foreign minister from China, the U.S. treasurer visit Africa. The chief issue, perhaps as Paul is saying, won't be Ukraine publicly, but it is a sign that Africa's might is sort of established, and these foreign powers trying to win Africa's influence.
You know, that means, you know, in the Ukraine issue that Africa counts in diplomacy. For the first time,
Have a seat at the table.
Africa is the center of the, you know, the intention of diplomatic and Western countries.
The beautiful bride that everybody wants to wed with.
Russia too. Lavrov 2 times in 7 months he came in Africa. It's not to say how Africa is wonderful. It's to just to talk with presidents and say, please be with us. I think that, you know, when we just see the votes from the beginning of the war, because now it's 1 year, you know, of the war, and what's happened, you know, 3 days ago, we see the different evolution. I talked about Madagascar. Remember, in the beginning, they say we don't take, you know, we make abstention. Yes, 2 days ago, they vote for, you know. So, you know, the myth of what you say about Wagner influence, Russia having influence. Russia just discovered how African people is not, you know, the guy that you can control as you want. Mali vote against, it's true, but South Africa, you know, RCA, everybody thought at this moment that, oh, South Africa is dead, they will vote against. They decide to make an abstention. Cameroon decide to say, I'm not be in the vote, I'm out. So for me, it's very important to say to African people that it's not a resignation. We need that Africa be here when we need to be. And for, you know, what's happened in Congo again, why African countries don't put Rwanda, you know, you know, in struggle and say, you can do it, because the problem is African.
Yeah.
And France is not an appeal court of, you know, unresponsibility of African leaders. I mean, if you don't have, you know, a coalition with African people to say, we are not agree with what Rwanda said, why Europe will say it to African? It will be again a colonization, others. For me, it's very important that these steps have to be there. Then France will say, you're right, we will be with you.
Behind the scene, what is happening is that the Africans can't compel Rwanda because Rwanda is heavily supported by Western powers.
But what's happened, you know, with Zelensky in the beginning was this little country that nobody knows where you put it in the map. Now Zelensky, he made, you know, everything. He knocked on all the doors and say, I'm here, and you have to deal with me, not without me. And I feel that Congo is this huge country. Sorry. He has to be, at this moment, we Africans have to be in the side of Congolese country.
We're running out of time. Paul Melly, I want to ask you, Russia, China, Turkey, other countries playing up on anti-French sentiment, often saying they have a clean record in regards to colonialism, at least on the continent. What can Emmanuel Macron do in the face of those arguments?
Well, I think he can only really play the long game. And although he started out by saying, well, we're not going to compete, actually, if you listen to his sort of later comments towards the end of his speech, when he was asked about Wagner, he sort of said, look, we can't stop countries choosing Wagner, but little by little, they will probably find that it's not the answer to their security problems, and they might look back or look elsewhere. So I think what his approach is to try and say, look, France, or more broadly European countries or Western countries, can offer a more respectful, more thought through partnership approach, and it won't always be the first option. For some countries like Mali in crisis, they may think it's not adequate, but in the long term, they will find that is a more stable, easier relationship to deal with. It's more transparent and it's more reflective of those countries' particular needs. I think all he can do really, and all he's aiming to do, is, as it were, establish that as an alternative and hope that bit by bit, individual African countries decide that the West is a useful partner.
Indeed. Paul, thank you very much. I want to thank our guests. We're running out of time. Emmanuel Macron making this speech from French soil. In a few more days, he'll be on African soil, so we'll see what it's actually like the reception.
Be able to compare the content.
Right. Thank you very much. Emmanuel Iga, Lovo Rinal, and Paul Melly joining us. That's it for the France 24 debate. Stay tuned. Live from Paris continues at the top of the hour.